past programs in our Pathways of Peru series. I'm Antonia Stevens, the director, for those of you who don't know me. And every year we do a 8-week series where we try and get people to either walk or read a certain number of miles or a certain number of books based on a pilgrimage or a pathway or a journey. And the first 2 years we did the Iditarod. Last year we did the Camino de Santiago, and this year we decided to do a version of the Inca Trail. And we were carefully trying to fill up our programming, and we were short some programs, and I happened to be driving listening to WCAI, as I do every morning, when I heard Mark Faherty talking about his Christmas bird count and how his yearly bird count goes up every year because he goes to Peru. And I got back to the library, immediately sent out an email going, what do I have to lose? And he graciously accepted our invitation to come and talk about birding in Peru. And I have done some work. I've been a field assistant for people who did some work in Tobago, so I'm kind of interested in perhaps similarities and differences in some of the birds that you would see in different parts of Central South America. So that's other than the fact that I work here, that's my other reason for being interested in this talk. And without me going on anymore, I'd like to introduce Mark Faherty, and he will take it from here. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you. All right. This is going to be a lot of birds, right? Probably not birders. Who's a birder? Sort of. You guys, God bless you. Still, but please, so we can talk about other things, but I'm going to need to manage myself here because I really love birds, I really love traveling, and combining the two, especially in a place like Peru, which is one of the top 3 or 4 most biodiverse countries on the planet, and particularly in terms of birds. It's ridiculous there. It's absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to try to convey that, but I can get carried away, and I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to have to be managing myself. But if you want to focus on anything else, feel free to stop and ask questions. But I'm going to be talking about slides, photos I've taken from 3 trips to Peru in the last, I guess, 2 years, year and a half, 2 years. I've been very lucky. I had never been to Peru before that time. But a couple of years ago, I ended up filling in for one of my Mass Audubon colleagues up at our headquarters in Lincoln, who was supposed to be leading this tour that we do. It's a cruise. It's a very standard kind of tour that people do on the Amazon in Peru. I'll show you that. And I had a week's notice that I was going to be filling in for him. I had never been to Peru, and here's the Peruvian bird book. It's, 1,800 species. It's like an unabridged dictionary. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll fill in. So it really is overwhelming, and it's just an incredible place. So that was the first trip, this Amazon cruise, and I'll go over that. As a result of a contact I made on that trip, I got to go on this other trip, which is in the travel industry called a FAM trip, a familiarization trip. And it was free. It was an all-expenses-paid trip to southern Peru so that some of the folks in the tourism industry could demonstrate this itinerary, which we would then go back and sell to our travelers. And that was incredible. And then I got to go on another FAM trip to northern Peru, and I'll go over all of that. So I'm like an expert now. All right, so if I'm in anybody's way, it might be somewhat unavoidable, but I can try to manage that. So here's us. Here's Peru. You don't even have to change your watch when you go down there. Mostly in the same time zone. And so here it is. It's bordered by Ecuador and Colombia and Brazil and Bolivia. And most of it is Amazonian lowlands. And then there's the spine of the Andes, which also is in Colombia, a little bit in Venezuela, Ecuador, and then these sort of desert lowlands along the coast. Let's zoom in a little bit here. So here's Peru zoomed in. You would always fly into Lima here, this coastal desert city. And the contrasts in Peru are unbelievable. So you fly into this coastal desert, but there's penguins. and water is very scarce. I'll show you some photos. But then, you take another flight to get to anywhere else if you're doing any jungle stuff. And then to go from that coastal desert to the wettest, the biggest river in the world. There's a river that drains like 2.7 million square miles of South America. And there's macaws and parrots and jaguars and all of that. To go from that to that in an hour or two is pretty remarkable. And then there's the Andes, and we'll get into all of that. So here's Lima. This is not my photo, but it's it's a world-class city. They focus on cuisine a lot now. I think some really 5 Michelin star restaurants, or however that rating system works. Becoming very well known in that whole world. But it's very, very dry, and it's because of this Humboldt current on the Pacific somehow robs this area of moisture until you get to the other side of the Andes, where all of a sudden there's tons of rainfall and you have rainforest. But these guys struggle. But despite that, they get floods every so often. So there's some devastating floods within the last 2 years there in Lima. And so it's very much a world-class city. But then it's South America, and Peru in particular suffers from this really wicked division between rich and poor. It's not good. And they haven't been able to fix this. And so if you go, like as a birder, a normal traveler might just go to some restaurants in Lima and you get on your flight and you go home. But I wanted to go do some birding, so some of us, we drive through these kind of shantytown parts of Lima on the outskirts to get to some other birding spots. And so you get to see how the other half lives. And walls have been in the news. There's literally a wall between rich and poor in Lima. They built a wall in some of the wealthier neighborhoods to keep these folks are just building these. They're sort of squatting and building these. And this is a nicer one. Some of them are just built into the side of, it's a big pile of dirt. It's Mad Max stuff down there. But Lima itself is very nice unless you don't like traffic. I'm not a city guy. I mean, I want to get out into nature. I'll do the Lima thing and go to the restaurant and they demonstrate how to make a pisco sour. It's kind of a fun drink that they do down there with a wine-based liquor. But then I want to get out where there's nature. Whether it's Europe or whatever, I want to get out into the parks and start seeing nature. So the first trip I did, this is a lot of nature tour organizations do this trip, and you get on a riverboat here in Iquitos, which is the capital of the Peruvian Amazon. So this is the northern part of Peru, that vast Amazonian kind of northern part of Peru. Brazil is here, and Ecuador is up here, Colombia. And this is where the Amazon starts, according to Peru. Brazil doesn't recognize that, but the Marañón and Ucayali rivers come together, and now this is the Amazon. And then it goes all the way through Brazil and out to the Atlantic Ocean. Biggest river by volume and probably by length in the world. And Iquitos is totally isolated. You have to fly there, otherwise it's all boat travel, and there's one highway to this other city called Nauta, and that's it. It's just in the middle of the Amazon. And so you go to Iquitos and you get on a boat and you cruise down these tributaries, and then you do little excursions during the day in smaller skiffs where you go out to look for wildlife and birds, and then back to your luxe air-conditioned cabin on this boat. This is not like what Teddy Roosevelt experienced going down the Amazon. This is like, frozen towel, Mr. Faherty? Oh yes, thank you. Such a very difficult skiff ride. Oh, passion fruit juice, thank you. So this is kind of a high-end tour. I like to get dirty a little bit more, but it was nice. And so this is Iquitos, this capital of the northern Peruvian Amazon here. Nice little city. And then you get on the boat, and it's a big old muddy river. I mean, this is the Amazon. I got excited because I look at this and I'm like, oh, this is just trackless jungle, heart of darkness. Oh my God, there's nothing there. but there are people there. I mean, there are people living like back in here on all like villages, just back in these little backwaters where they're traveling by boat to the major cities now and again, or relatively major cities. And it was really surprising for me to see that. And so the river changes its level a lot over the course of a year. So they have a wet season and a wetter season. There's no dry. There's nothing you would call a dry season in the Amazon, wet and wetter. And so they have to be on stilts. In the dry season, this might be 10 feet down to the ground level, and in the wet season, in the wetter season, it's right up to here, and they don't have a soccer field anymore because it's under 9 feet of water. So this is kind of the rhythm of their lives over the course of the year. And we went in way in, like, you know, like overhanging vegetation, like putting our way back through these backwaters, and then there's this little village with a government teacher and school kids with uniforms. It was just sort of mind-blowing culturally. And so we visited with them, and they sang us songs. There was a facility, this is a little bit out of order, there was a facility in Iquitos that there are manatees, freshwater manatees in the Amazon, and so they were working to protect them there. So very quickly you start seeing kind of what you would expect in the Amazon jungle, chestnut-eared aracari, the type of toucan. And then you see your boat, and this is the old boat. There's an actually more luxurious one they're using now, but this one was very, very nice. It was called the Amazon Star. And these are the cabins, your air-conditioned cabins, a little deck on them, and then the air-conditioned eating area, and then the open-air upper deck with a bar, and great viewing opportunities up there. I think the new one has a hot tub up here, and it's a little much. So here's the bar where you get your one free drink at happy hour every night, and there's a scope for, you know, viewing the wildlife when you're stopped. The food was very, very good. There's a thing that every tourist, you know, they all do down there where you go out and you catch piranhas. And so this was, you know, and then they cook them up for you on the boat. And it's a little ridiculous. You use more beef to catch the piranhas than you get back in meat from the piranhas you catch. But it's a thing that you do just to say you did it. But the food is good. The staff, these are the bird guides who work like dawn to dusk, and then they turn into a band. And they call themselves a different thing every night. The Amazonian village people, the howler monkey, no, what else? They had some great fun names. The Dung Beetles. They were a Beatles cover band that night. But they do some traditional music, and then they go back to, you know, making the beds and acting as guides. And so here you're on these little skiffs during the day, going out on up to 4 excursions, starting before breakfast. And we see things like this white-headed marsh tyrant. This is a female. I like this photo because if you know John James Audubon's artwork, I always thought that he put birds in ridiculous poses because he would shoot them and then pose them and then paint them. And they were always in these like dramatic poses that I was like, you don't see that in nature. But this was sort of a John James Audubon pose of this female flycatcher. This is a bird that's the size of a SUV. It's a turkey-sized bird with the great name of the horned screamer. And there's this little horn, and they're huge, but they soar. So think of the turkeys that are becoming so ubiquitous now. Imagine if one of those 22-pound turkeys like got up and then started circling and it was like soaring with the osprey all of a sudden. I mean, that's kind of like what these birds are like. Might have a picture of one of their nests later.
Is that a little one beside it?
No, that's just cecropia trees are ubiquitous and very important throughout Central and South America, and that's they can old shriveled up leaf.
Don't try to like cut branch or anything off of them. Full of ants.
Oh yeah. All right, so I've been a wildlife nerd since I was a little kid. Since before I could read, I was into birds. You know, all the wildlife documentaries on TV. Wild Wild World of Animals. I watched it like every night. So this was something I was really excited to see. This is a Pygmy Marmoset. And so this is a pocket-sized monkey. Like, here's my Pygmy Marmoset. You know, it's a primate, but it's like the size of a chipmunk. And they feed by biting the trees and eating the sap. So there's a little tiny monkey with a sweet tooth. And this is a heavily, heavily edited photo. I was shooting at what seemed like darkness. I don't know how the guides are incredible. I don't know how they found these animals. Like they're like, wait. And they pull the boat under the canopy, like, and like, there they are. This little thing is like clinging to the side of it. Like, how the hell did you know that was there? But they're very good at what they do. There it is again. This one was getting a little protein, eating a katydid. Pygmy Marmoset, adorable monkey. This was a somewhat sketchy brown woolly monkey, it's called, and it was probably kept by one of the lodges. There's a surprising number of lodges along the river, tourist lodges, and they used to keep wildlife, macaws and monkeys and things, and then they weren't allowed to anymore, so now there are these sort of out-of-work monkeys that hang around sketchily outside the lodge. Technically not supposed to be at the lodge anymore, but I don't know what else to do. So you can get very close to them. And there are lots of macaws down there. So parrots, parakeets, this whole family of birds reaches incredible levels of diversity down there. I think we saw 7 different species of macaws. You might know the Scarlet Macaw, those big ones. There's a guy at First Encounter Beach in Eastham who obviously likes the attention, and he has a Scarlet Macaw. I'm not sure how that's legal, but he goes and walks around. And it's an impressive bird. And this is where they come from. This is a lesser known one called the red-bellied macaw. Big flocks. I did not get good photos of scarlet macaws. Unfortunately, I think because they've been exploited so much, stealing the chicks for the pet trade, especially throughout Central and South America, it's not easy to get close to them. But this was a terrible, terrible photo I got. Night monkeys. These are very special and very adorable. I've seen these in Panama as well. They get up into Central America, but they're nocturnal. And anything nocturnal tends to have big eyes and is thus adorable. And these guys are no exception. And so the guides happen to know of a cavity where the night monkeys were sleeping during the day, and we went and knocked, and they came out, posed for some photos. They're small, beautiful monkeys. Cormorants. This is just a nice photo of a neotropic cormorant, which is very closely related to our double-crested cormorant on the river. Beautiful, emerald-colored eye.
Ours have black eyes, don't they?
No, ours are actually have beautiful eyes in breeding season if you get close enough to them. Large-billed tern, very, very common on the river, especially where tributaries came together. So this is an iconic bird of the Amazons. Anybody know what this is? It's it sounds like you've got a little something. It's a Watson. Watson. And there's nothing else like it. They don't even know what it is. They're like, we think it's a cuckoo maybe, but they're big. You know, they're like this big.
Wow.
And they clamber around awkwardly in the trees like it's their first day as a bird. They're just like, everything they do looks awkward. You're like, how are you still not extinct? But apparently they smell bad, and so they don't eat them. Generally, big birds on the Amazon are hard to find. Things like crassids, curassows, things like that, because they taste good on a taco, as somebody down there once said to me. Anything that tastes good on a taco is hard to find. But these guys don't get eaten, so they're still fairly common. And they eat leaves. They're a ruminant, like a cow, which is there's no other bird like that. And they're young or like have claws on their wings that they use to clamber around in the bushes. They drop into the water when there's any sign of trouble.
Excuse me, Mark?
Yeah.
Does it fly?
Yes,
It does, okay.
but it looks like they shouldn't be.
Okay.
You know, they'll fly across an oxbow lake and then crash into the bushes on the other side.
Okay.
They're not migrating. Festive parrot is the official name of this bird. I think they have some kind of a mating dance that's very festive. It's relatively plain looking as far as parrots go, but this is I listen to like small wildlife. This is a little pocket parrot called a blue-winged parrotlet. A parrotlet. Who knew? You know, they're like this big. Not a great photo, but a bird that I like. Black-collared hawk, a beautiful hawk of wetlands from Mexico through South America. Slate-colored hawk. Lots of raptors down there, different hawks and falcons. This is a channel-billed toucan eating some kind of a fig, probably. Alright, so this isn't the best photo, but this is a pretty rare monkey. We're going to stick here, called a monk-saki monkey. And I don't know if you've been to the Amazon, but it's warm. It's warm and it's moist, and I don't know why you would want to be wearing this dense fur coat. But they look very hot. But that was a cool monkey. We only saw that once. I'd never heard of them before that trip. And I'm usually pretty good with this is a Caiman lizard. We always stopped and looked at these. They're big. You know, they're big iguana-like lizards. Laughing falcon. These guys eat snakes, so they're really tough skin on their feet and legs. And they just stand around looking for snakes to eat with their big weird heads. And there are dolphins. So this is, you know, the upper Amazon and tributaries. This isn't anywhere near any kind of ocean. But these dolphins live in this latte textured water. You can't see through it. But there are two species of dolphins up there. There's the gray river dolphin, which are a little bit easier to photograph. And then the more iconic pink river dolphin, which I didn't get great photos of. We had some who showed a little bit for us. They were always around, but it was kind of like a minke whale. If you go on a whale watch, the minkies don't do stuff the way humpbacks do. They just sort of they breathe and they go. And that's how the pink dolphins were. So I don't know how people got these photos of them, but they're a bizarre animal. This big melon probably has some role in echolocation. I can't imagine they can see much of anything in those waters. But that was a trip to see those guys. And like a lot of things, they were especially common where two rivers came together. Those seem to be really productive spots, and there were always dolphins at those spots. This was an apparently hallucinogenic frog that the villagers, this guy was telling us that the hunters would burn themselves and then rub the skin of this frog into the wound, and then they would then trip. And that would help them to find the animals and be one with the animals and find them on a hunt. We did not get a chance to see what that was like. Tempting. These are giant lily pads that you could set up a beach chair on. Giant water lily, classic Amazon plant. Red howler monkey. So though it looks like Heart of Darkness, as I was explaining, lots of villages, and those villages are full of subsistence hunters, right? They're not going to Stop and Shop. So they eat everything. They eat the monkeys, even in the cities. You go in the cities and they're butchering monkeys in the markets. It's it's shocking for us, but that's what they do. And so, he's like, whoa, who are you? What are you doing? The sound of a boat motor. It was surprisingly difficult to see wildlife in the Amazon. I was a little bit disappointed by that, and it's because of the subsistence hunters. It's a little better in the south, and I'll show you some stuff from the south here. Armored catfish. This is when we went piranha fishing. One of my favorite things was this little sunset boat ride we did. They made us tea and we had cookies, and we just listened to kind of dusk falling over the forest. Yeah, tarantulas. Classic kind of Central and South American tourist thing is to find tarantulas, and the guides will put them on their hand and things like that. Blue and gold or blue and yellow macaws. Big, they're like this big, just flying around, squawking. Very Amazonian. Sloths. I find sloths easier to find in Central America for some reason, but we did find a classic three-toed sloth on one of these boat trips. Everyone loves sloths. They're a meme, or they were 5 years ago. White-eared jacamar. It's a crazy bird that's like part kingfisher, part flycatcher, part hummingbird. I just like this picture. This is a very common owl throughout Central and South America called the Ferruginous pygmy owl. Little owl with a big name. And they are active during the day and they hunt birds. And I found this owl because of, can anyone find the hummingbird in this photo? Unfortunately, I didn't even know it was obscured by the stick, but this hummingbird was like making a lot of noise and buzzing this owl, as birds do when they find an owl. Another horned screamer at a nest. They just nest on the ground. They're like, yeah, you want this? Come and get it, you know. They're huge.
Does he scream? What's his call?
I can play it for you if I can find it. I don't know how loud this will be, but it's crazy. Let's see. There's a great app that corresponds to that field guide. It's called the Birds of Peru, yeah. It's fairly logical in this case. That's not good. It's kind of in the background. It's kind of a trumpeting sound. It's not really a scream.
honking one.
It's pretty honky. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a pretty common bird related to our blackbirds and orioles, called the yellow-rumped cacique, and beautiful blue eye. And they nest. I don't know if you know what orapendal is.
Yeah.
If you go to like Costa Rica or whatever, you see these colonies of nests that are this big, hanging pendulous nests. And so they make nests kind of like that, colonial nesting birds. Brown capuchin, however you pronounce that, eating some gigantic fruit that it was smashing over and over again on the branch to open it up. Guana. Wood creepers are classic birds of jungle and cloud forest in Central and South America, and this is the biggest one I've ever seen. It's called a long-billed wood creeper. You know, the bill is like that big. It's a big bird. It creeps along trunks. Excited to see that. This was the best I could do with a ridiculous electric bird called the paradise tanager. And there are all these little flocks of tanagers. The tanagers there are smaller than ours, and there's millions of species, not literally. And they're most diverse in the higher elevations, but there are lots on the Amazon as well. I took an internet photo to show you what they really look like if you got a close look. And there's lots of species, like just absurdly gorgeous birds down there. And that's what the tourists are paying for, the bird tours. And some of these tanagers will come into feeders. I'll show you some feeder shots later on. It's not like here where you put out sunflower seed. You put out bananas and other fruits. Sand-colored nighthawk. You would find these kind of roosting during the day in riverside vegetation, and then at dusk they would flock. Like hundreds of them will fly over you, heading down to the river, or heading down the river to hunt at night. A wattled jacana with newly hatched little babies, still wet, right out of the egg here, and then a fuzzier one that had hatched earlier. A wattled jacana. They have giant feet, and they walk around on aquatic vegetation, like kind of like snowshoes, but for water. Fuzzy baby here. Not new. Of course, a black-capped Donacobius, but you knew that. This is a black-tailed trogon. It was one of the trogons, and so I'm leading a trip to Tanzania in like less than 2 weeks, I think, at this point. And so I've been cramming for that, which is very, very different. And so I had to get back into my Peru headspace for this trip. And so there's going to be a couple of species that probably escape me. The reality is you won't know. I can make up anything. Well, this is Johnson's trogon. It's very rare.
We're in a library, we'll find out.
Yeah, you'll look it up.
I've got a phone.
There's the back side of it. Trogons are beautiful birds of the New World tropics. They're also in Asia, and there are a few species in Africa. but their highest diversity is in the New World tropics. And they make a big deal about eating fruit. They make more work out of eating fruit than is necessary. It's like their life is too easy because there's so much food there in the jungles. They'll fly out like a flycatcher and make this dramatic sally and grab a fig off of a branch and then fly back. I feel like there's an easier way to do that. This is boa, sort of tree frog, white-lipped tree frog. These are grubs that are some kind of probably a beetle that they find in some of the palms, and it's a local delicacy. There's a lot of protein there and fat. I did not try one. This is one of our guides. We visited with a shaman who did kind of a strange ritual that involved like cigarette smoke. It didn't feel as traditional as it might have, but he talked a lot about all of the local plants and what they use them for. 9 times out of 10, it was for diarrhea. I don't think it's just the travelers that suffer from those issues down there, because like every plant, this is good for diarrhea. That was kind of cool. That was a special thing. Here's the shaman. And our guide was clearly a frustrated shaman. He said he did not get picked to be a shaman in his village. He grew up in one of these villages. Now he lives in Iquitos, but he was clearly sad and really was like wanted to be the shaman here, because it's a great honor. The markets, were interesting. A lot of catfish. This was in a city called Nauta, the one that's south of Iquitos. And so we went there to check out the market, and there's some stuff there you don't want to know. Don't ask. Mostly catfish, but sometimes caimans or different birds that we wouldn't think of eating. But this was our nice civilized dining area, and they celebrated people's birthdays, and very, very service oriented, really top notch. They did like bath towel origami sculptures, and they demonstrated it. So every day you would have some Rorschach test of a towel sculpture that you had to figure out what it was. But they were really ingenious, like this candle and a dog wearing glasses and another dog and a turtle. Okay, so now we're heading. So that was northern Peruvian Amazon. So now we're getting further down the tributaries to the Madre de Dios region, still Amazonian jungle lowlands, bordering Bolivia and Brazil, near Cusco. So Cusco, the very high 10,000-foot city, is here, and Machu Picchu, but we're starting in the lowlands here, the Madre de Dios River, and this little city called Puerto Maldonado that you go out of. And there's lots of lodges down there on these rivers. So I want to put in a plug for the trip I'm leading in November. And there's an itinerary back there on the table, and it's to this region. And so we're going to be back some places that I haven't been back in the reserve, where it's easier to see wildlife. They see jaguars much more often than anywhere else. It's very difficult to see jaguars in the Amazon. And tapirs and things like that, and so the wildlife is easier to see. There's a Scarlet Macaw project that you get to see up close. The best clay lick in Peru is down here, which is something where hundreds and hundreds of macaws and parrots and parakeets come in to eat clay off the banks of the river, and you get to see that. So I'm really looking forward to that trip. That's in November. And then there's an extension, and I would recommend doing the extension to Machu Picchu up here by way of Cusco. So I'm really looking forward to that trip. And so that's on the Mass Audubon website. You just Google Mass Audubon, Peru, my name, whatever, 2019, and you'll find it. And the itinerary's back there on that table. So that'll be fun.
All right. How many people go?
I think up to a dozen, but we'll run it. Sometimes it's better to run it with fewer. I think I only have 6 people in Tanzania because some people had to drop out. So that's going to be a better experience for us. And so Inkaterra sponsored this first fam trip that I went on, and they own some kind of high-end lodges. If you've been to Machu Picchu, then you might have stayed at their they have the best hotel, which is actually in the cloud forest, just on the outskirts of the little town Aguascalientes there at Machu Picchu, where the train ends. Has anyone been to Machu Picchu? Yeah. Where did you stay?
I stayed in Ollantaytambo.
Oh, so you day tripped?
I did.
Oh, interesting. Okay. That's a beautiful train ride from
Yes.
Ollantaytambo. It's a long, complicated word, and that's the town where you pick up the train, and then it's this unspeakably gorgeous train ride where the train is just like clear topped, basically glass topped, because you're looking at these snow-capped mountains as you go along the Urubamba River up to where you get to Machu Picchu. Keep doing that as if it works. It does not work. So this is the typical, like on the Amazon, the lodges, you arrive there in a little skiff like this, and then you go up some stairs, and then, it's in primary or secondary rainforest, and you have these comfortable little huts. Not buggy at all. Not buggy, and some of them don't even have windows or screens. It was remarkably not buggy. And here, this is the first one we stayed, called Inkaterra Guides Field Station. With this is where you ate, and then these were your rooms, and it's just in the jungle, and just incredible. You got 5 species of owls calling one night, tropical crazy owls you've never heard of. I was just in heaven. There's little things called mouse opossums, tiny little opossums. You can't even tell what species there are. There are so many.
Was that a marsupial? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a possum. It's just a small
Oh.
genus. And then black-fronted nunbirds, like a Catholic nun. I guess they look like they're wearing a habit. They're very, very common. Giant cowbird. So they parasitize. You know how cowbirds parasitize? They lay their eggs in other birds' nests. These guys are this big, and they lay their eggs in the big nests of Oripendulus. And so a big bird parasitizing the nests of another big bird. Common along the river, gray-lined hawk, ladder-tailed nightjar. You're just, you're cruising along in the skiff, and sometimes the birds just sit there. Giant amoeba lizard. There's the butterflies on this second trip I went on. It was the lower water season, and so there was lots of exposed mud, which meant that the butterflies were fantastic, because butterflies love exposed mud and puddles. And so this is some kind of an emperor. It's hard to figure them out. This is not a good book, but they're just spectacular. Of course, the blue morphos, iconic, B-52 sized butterflies of tropical forest. Spoiler alert, this one was dead. They don't stay for a photo. They don't ever stop moving, as far as I can tell. I've never seen one land, so this one was recently dead. Good way to get it deposed. This is a sister, some kind of a sister. And then this was the Hacienda Concepcion, a beautiful Incaterra lodge down in the Madre de Dios region. Pretty high-end, beautiful rooms, like individual, like casita, little like huts that you had to yourself. And Bolivian squirrel monkeys were there. And this one has a baby, sleepy baby squirrel monkey. And then we were walking along the trail, and there was someone from a government employee who worked for the tourism board. It was very much, she grew up in Cusco, and she was like this, 20-something city girl who always had these perfect, like brand new looking running shoes, and she looked very urban as we're walking around on these trails in the Amazon. And she was walking in front of me, and she just like steps over this thing. She never saw this snake, which is a rainbow boa. Not dangerous at all, but it was just funny. I just watched her step over it and keep going. I was like, Yenny, look down. Beautiful snake. Blue-fronted jacamar. Jacamars are beautiful, shiny birds that are fairly common down there. Do a lot of fly catching. Flowers, I don't know what they are, just spectacular flowers along the banks of the river everywhere you go. Yellow-spotted river turtle. And sometimes you get this little like Disney movie moment. This is a fairly common thing, actually. I don't know if they get something out of this or if it's just like, you know, seems like a stick, so why not land there? This is Coco, the black caiman, and caimans are like alligators. There aren't alligators down there, but there are different kinds of caiman, and they can get fairly big. And the reason I have such a good photo of this one is because presumably people were feeding it. It just swam right over to us when we were at this dock at a lodge. Oh, and this was very good. So giant river otters, these 5+ foot long monster river otters down there. And we lucked out on this one boat ride where you definitely don't have a 100% chance of finding them. And they were just right next to the boat, just munching on their fish, and while we snapped away in our photos. That was fun. And then anywhere, you take any boat ride between Mexico and Bolivia, you're going to find these things. And these are called different things in different places, Proboscis Bats. But they spend the day on the side of a tree hanging over water like this. And kind of like, they're little, so you have to get up close to see what's going on. But they're these beautiful little bats hang out, especially on palm trees. They are nocturnal. They're just sleeping. You're catching them when they're kind of sleeping during the day, and they pick a prominent place for some reason. It's a beautiful bird called a great cow wood rail. And most rails, like there are rails around here, but they're very, very difficult to see. The wood rails are a little bit easier to come out to the open more. Green ibis, not an easy bird to find. Even the bill is green. The legs are green. Striated heron, closely related to green herons, which will come back here in May, that breed around here. They used to be considered the same species. Another Watson, I should have quizzed you. Just a missed opportunity. Limpkin. So if you see South American movies where they get the soundtrack right, you'll often hear limpkins in the background. And you can see these in condo complexes in South Florida. But they're mainly tropical, and they have these crazy far-carrying cries that make it into the background of movies when they're trying to convey a sense of jungleness. And they eat snails, big snails, almost exclusively. There's Cusco, nestled high in the mountains. It's high enough that you're short of breath when you get off the plane if you haven't been there. And they, often recommend taking some altitude sickness pills as a preventative, which I did, but I was still very short of breath when I got there. Maybe it's 12,000 feet, I think. And then you go down. Machu Picchu itself is lower than Cusco. So you're better off there than when it's kind of good to start high there, and then you're used to it by the time you get to Machu Picchu. It's a nice little city with beautiful colonial architecture. And there are flamingos in the highlands. So this was some pond, some lake in the Sacred Valley where there are Chilean flamingos in the afternoon light. It's very nice. And then weirdly, this was one of the most uncommon birds we saw, which is a bird you can go to Dows's Beach and see now. This is sanderling. It's an Arctic breeding shorebird that we get, most of the year here. And for some reason, they were at 10,000 feet in the Andes.
Did you see any of the North American, like the migrants when you're down there?
Yeah, not too many get that far. You see more of our migrants, like our warblers and tanagers and buntings and things, in Central America. That's where most of them go. A few really hardcore migrants go as far as Colombia, Peru, and even like southern Peru. And shorebirds definitely go that far. Shorebirds go all the way, some of them all the way to Tierra del Fuego at the south end of South America. But yeah, they're a little harder to find. We have broad-winged hawk, a couple of warblers, I think, tanagers. This is a very luxe Inkaterra property that they had us stay in for free again. And, you know, I'm with these other bird tour leaders. There are these 3 Brits that I kind of bonded with, and we're sitting at dinner, and I'm like, would you ever take clients here? They're like, no, I couldn't budget this in. It's like $700 a night. But it was nice to see that end of the market. And I don't think we would stay there on one of our trips because it would make the trip too expensive to sell. But you had basically, I mean, these things were the rooms, and they were like a little bit smaller than my house in Harwich. A little, you know, fireplace and multiple rooms, and it's just inside of this mountain, really beautiful. And then this mountain caracara, bird of the high Andes, beautiful raptor. And the flowers in the high elevations are absolutely incredible, and you can see the coevolution with hummingbirds for so many of them. And this is something that the hummingbird basically has to land and walk around and then probe into these flowers, and they do. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of species of hummingbirds in the high Andes. The most recent trip I did in November, I think we had 44 species of hummingbirds in less than a week. We have 1 here, ruby-throated hummingbird. And then this is the Inkaterra Lodge in Machu Picchu. It's the one that's close to Machu Picchu. But it's just like right over here is this busy little town called Aguas Calientes where the cheaper places to stay are. And the train kind of runs here and ends here. But this place is nestled in the cloud forest. And cloud forest is just like one of my favorite things in the whole world as far as habitats go. It's cooler, so you're above the level where you're worried about Zika virus or, you know, there's no mosquitoes. It's cool, it's certainly humid, and the humidity gives you this incredible structural diversity, not just species diversity, but structural diversity. So every plant is covered in other plants, and those plants are covered in other plants. So there are all these niches to be exploited by all these different species of birds and reptile and everything else. And just, you know, everything flowers, you know, these are all flowering bromeliads and orchids and things. Just absolutely lush, and the biodiversity is incredible, especially hummingbirds and tanagers. And then there's I didn't get a great photo of a male. This is a female Andean cock of the rock. And so you would barely stop to look at this thing. I should have put in an internet photo of a male because they're spectacular. And then this is a bird about this big called the Andean motmot. And normally not that easy to see or approach, but this would just flop down in front of me on the trail at the lodge. And gorgeous bird of the New World tropics, Andean motmot. And so this tail, they're famous for they sit on a branch and their tail hangs down, you know, with the little pendulum, and they like a clock pendulum, they just go. No one really knows why. Yeah.
Is he shedding that feather?
It looks like it molted this one here, the modified kind of pendulum feather there, the racket.
No,
And it only has 1 currently.
They nibble them, so that they have the thing at the end. That doesn't grow in that way.
You know, I think I had forgotten that. That's true of the motmots. Somewhere, like back when I was in Mexico, I think I knew that, but I had forgotten that key little factoid. Thank you. A blue-naped chlorofonia, they're just a little thing, but just so intensely beautiful. And this is what I was talking about. This is what bird feeders look like in the tropics. And so the tanagers come in, you know, dozens of species of tanagers are possible. The motmots will visit these sometimes, and lots of birds. So between the hummingbird feeders and these feeders, you really get to experience the diversity of hummingbirds and tanagers at these lodges. Know what their banana budget is. And this is Machu Picchu. It's a kind of a strange place. It wasn't discovered archaeologically until like 1913. This guy Hiram Bingham, and has been it's still being excavated and explored and studied. I think it's been open to the public since the 80s, maybe. So a relatively new site. It's now one of the new wonders of the world. It was apparently not discovered by the Spanish when they were marauding around. And as far as they can tell, it was the estate of an emperor, an Incan emperor in the 1400s. And it was all the work that went into somehow chiseling away these big pieces of stone, and they're beautiful and smooth, and they fit together like they were machined. You know, with hand tools they did this, and it only lasted like 100 years in terms of being occupied. So a really interesting story. You only ever hear about the Incas, but there were civilizations in this area 4,500 years before this that no one ever talks about too, but the Incas are certainly fascinating. A green and white hummingbird. It just looks like a female ruby-throated hummingbird like we might have, but it's endemic to Peru, which always makes it exciting as a bird watcher to see something you can only see in Peru. And then this is a giant bromeliad that looks like a huge yucca, but it's closely related to those bromeliads that grow on trees. Weird little flowers. How many times am I going to try to advance this? As you watch helplessly. Is he going to press it again? Does he not know yet? This is another Peruvian endemic that was only discovered, I think, when in the 80s as well, when there were more visitors coming to Machu Picchu. So this species was unknown before the 80s. It's called Inca Wren. And so it's like a big, more colorful version of our Carolina wrens that you have in your backyard right now. Beautiful. You know, they're more like robin-sized than our wren. A beautiful, ubiquitous bird, like a backyard sparrow down there called the chestnut collared sparrow that you can see in highlands from Mexico to Argentina, I think. All right, and so this is now the North Peru highlands, and I didn't talk about our route on this most recent trip, which was from a town called Tarapoto, which is an Amazonian town in northern Peru, and then we took a route west towards the coast, up into the Andes, into the high Andes, back down again, and then up again. And so we got to visit a lot of different elevations, which meant that's how we got the 44 species of hummingbird. It's by visiting all of the different elevational bands and the different habitats that go along with that, plus the wet side and the dry side of mountains, it gets you an incredible diversity of habitats and species. And we had 400 species of birds or something like that in less than a week. And this is called, and it's a great name, a rufous-crested coquette. This coquettish little hummingbird with a spiky little bill, and this is a male. I don't know if he knows he's coquettish. And they were very common at this one lodge, at this particular elevational band. It's called a violet-headed hummingbird. It's not that colorful. This is a plant called Jamaican Vervain or blue porterweed. It has different names. But if you see this, if you're in the tropics somewhere and you see this plant, keep an eye out for hummingbirds because they absolutely love it. This is a Incan emerald, or Andean emerald, sorry. Beautiful little hummingbird. It's a yellow-breasted brush finch, but you knew that already, didn't you? This was a place in the cloud forest of northern Peru called Arbor Patricia Owlet Lodge. And this place was very basic. It was cold at night, and the rooms were not heated. But I could have stayed there for a month. You know, it's in the cloud forest, and it was like nothing I've ever experienced in terms of just dizzying, mixed flocks of new birds, new things I've never heard of, just all the time coming at you. I'm a biodiversity junkie, and I love that stuff. And there's nothing like these high Andean cloud forests. Things like this green and black fruit eater. It's related to catingas, if you know what catingas are, probably not. But just a strikingly beautiful bird. Pretty sure they eat fruit. Not a great photo, but I just love I love everything about these birds. They're called tufted cheeks. There's one, if you go to Costa Rica and to the higher elevations, you can see the buffy tufted cheek. This is a streaked tufted cheek. And they probe around in dead leaf clusters and bromeliads and things in these higher elevation cloud forests. So some of the hummingbirds here. This is a endemic, meaning, I don't know if I explained that, I think I did. Only occurs in Peru. It's endemic to Peru, meaning it only occurs there. And this is called a royal sun angel. And it just looks like a dark bird. Hummingbirds are tough if you don't get the right light angle in photography. This was not framed as well, but you get a little more of the sense of this deep purpley color. That was a spectacular bird. I hate to have, as a photographer, you don't want to have the feeder in the photo. So the professional photographers go to great lengths. They set up like different flashes on stands, all connected to their camera, and they try to get them when they're like hovering near the feeder. And I'm an amateur, so I don't have that luxury. But this is called, look at the little fuzzy pants. Here's the toe here. So this is cool. Most hummingbird species live in places that are fairly cool and sometimes cold. We think of them as probably think of them as this delicate little tropical bird, but they live in a lot of fairly cool places. Cool in many ways. And so here, this covers their legs, but it's probably more for show than for anything else. And so it's a booted racket tail.
Where does our hummingbird go in the winter?
Central America, yeah. You would see him if you went to Brazil, not Brazil, Belize or Costa Rica, Guatemala, places like that. Emerald-bellied puffleg. So they have these white little cotton balls on their legs here. Long-tailed sylph, beautiful, shiny, long-tailed hummingbird. And if it were to turn and face you, this would all be iridescent, kind of blue and purple and green, very shiny. But if you don't catch them right, you don't get the full effect. Another hummingbird called a collared Inca, pretty big. There's a giant hummingbird in the Andes that's like, maybe that big, this big long bill. And I didn't get any good photos of them. We did see them. So this is one of the marquee birds. One of the reasons people go here is to see this particular endemic hummingbird called a marvelous spatule tail. And there's this little birder kid who was like eight years old who would come to Cape Cod Bird Club meetings. And a birder I know, Peter Bono, was giving a presentation about this part of Peru, a trip he had done. And he puts up a photo like this, and this little kid, little 8-year-old kid, is in the front row. And he's probably never left the Cape at this point in his life. And he's like, "It's a marvelous spatule tail." Over and over again, this little voice, "It's a marvelous spatule tail." Like, how the hell does this kid, it's very, very obscure. I mean, its range, even within Peru, its range is like this big. And he just devoured bird books. And so this kid knew what this was. And so it's a marvelous spatule tail. And so this is the best I could do. It never stopped moving, and it would only be around for a little bit. And then you would hear, there was these Chinese tourists there whose cameras cost more than my car. A lot of them lined up. And so you would know when the bird showed up because it would sound like machine guns were going off. The high shutter speed, as people were taking pictures of this thing. And so this was the best I could do, and it's got like this iridescent purple and iridescent green, and then this just ridiculous, seemingly maladaptive tail. That it has some function in impressing the females, no doubt, because it certainly would attract the eye of a predator. Although maybe it's just sort of expendable, and if a predator grabs it, I don't know. You could theorize about these things, but it's just a spectacular bird. That much is certain. And so I got an internet photo, and I'm doing it again. I got an internet photo. This guy who's a professional photographer who leads photography workshops in the tropics. So this is just kind of a better idea of what these things look like. And I'm sure he had a series of flashes set up and spent the whole day, I would guess, multiple days probably. That's not a great photo, but it's just a fun bird that you can see in Lima in the wetlands. So now we're down in Lima. We're gonna finish in Lima because there's some good birding there. There's some good coastal birding. There's some coastal wetlands that are very, very good. And one of the birds you get in these coastal wetlands is called a many-colored rush tyrant. And it's supposedly related to flycatchers. We don't know what half the birds are down there, taxonomically speaking. They're like, maybe it's a tanager? So there's so many birds that the taxonomists are still catching up to classifying exactly what things are. This is a very ratty-looking, crappy-looking juvenile. I should have included a better photo of an adult, but it's just an incredible fever dream of a bird. And I promised penguins, and there are penguins. And so on this most recent trip, we did this white knuckle thing where we had to get to the airport by a certain time, and but like someone found us a driver, and we went to this place called Isla Pusana, which is a little fishing village with a pinnacle rock with all kinds of nesting seabirds on it, including these penguins. And so we jetted down there, walked up, hired a fisherman on the spot to take us around, and got this little photo safari. And we're very glad we did it because it was incredible to be able to get photos like this of these Humboldt penguins being affectionate with each other here. And from jungle to penguins. And sea lions, South American sea lions. Females arguing over the guy here, apparently. Being affectionate too. Look at the size of this guy. All of these photos were taken from a moving boat in fairly rough water, so it was a little challenging. There are a lot of blurry ones I had to delete. Inca tern. So you probably know common terns come back here in May. But this is one of the most spectacular, probably the most spectacular tern in the world. And it's on the Pacific coast of South America. Inca tern. Big colony on this rock with the penguins and with pelicans and boobies and cormorants and all these things were nesting here. Do you know what kind of bird this is, at least, if not? Yeah, so this is an oyster catcher, same size and shape as our American oyster catcher, but it's a species that you find down there called a blackish oyster catcher, right in the harbor. But there are also American oyster catchers down there, the same ones that you might see here in the summer. They also breed down there, and this was also in Lima. This is all coastal parts of Lima. These are both birds that you could see around here. So this is the same migratory whimbrel that breeds probably on the Mackenzie River Delta in Arctic Canada. The same population that would come through here in late summer. You wouldn't see them. You'd have to. The sanctuary in Wellfleet is the best place to see these things, but you also can see them in Lima. Any guess? You might be able to see these at Dowses Beach right now. Certainly other times of year. It's a ruddy turnstone, Arctic nesting migratory shorebird that comes through here, and they go all the way to pretty far down into South America, all the way to the bottom, I think. Black-necked stilt, another bird you can see in the U.S. is down there. You know what that is? These breed. They used to breed on Monomoy. They breed on Martha's Vineyard. It's called a black skimmer, and it's the only bird in the world where the lower mandible is longer than the upper mandible. And this is how they feed. They drag that long lower mandible through the water, and then have this lightning-fast reaction when they sense a fish, and they just snap them up. They often feed at dusk. And so at dusk, you'll just see this, something kind of breaking the water like it's a fish going along like this, but it's them dragging their lower beak. Franklin's gulls. These gulls nest in like the prairie provinces of Canada, the upper Midwestern freshwater marshes in the U.S., and they all get together in these giant flocks, and they fly down through Mexico and Central America, and they winter in South America by the thousands. I estimated there were 5,000 in this flock. Franklin's gull's a North American nesting gull that winters down there. Peruvian thickney, which is in this like post-apocalyptic rubble-strewn lot where it's blended in very well. They're related to plovers. This was a target bird for us. Average person probably wouldn't care. Peruvian boobies, you probably know blue-footed boobies. I'm almost done, hang in there. And so this was at the same Pucusana where the penguins were. There were all these nesting Peruvian boobies. And northern gannets, you familiar with those around here? Spectacular, big plunge diving, pelican relatives. And so these guys are closely related. They're in the same family. Dive for fish from great heights. And the Peruvian pelican, which looks just like the brown pelicans you would see in Florida or California, but quite a bit bigger. I guess I'm done. I'm done with birds. This is a library. This is my favorite book about that area, but it's very bird focused. So this is about, it's called A Parrot Without a Name, as you can see, and it's about these expeditions, really in the 80s, that are still going on now. There are still species to be discovered in some of these jungles down there. There are still relatively unexplored places. There was a new species discovered in northern Peru like last year or the year before. Sometimes it's like they just hadn't looked closely enough at this one area and they thought it was a subspecies of something else. Anyway, so this book is about some of these expeditions in the 80s, back when the infrastructure was not very good. And it was these teams of ornithologists from LSU, including this guy, legendary guy, a rock star birding called Ted Parker, who rock star-like died in a plane crash, relatively young, but he was the most knowledgeable neotropical ornithologist of his time. And so this is an author who was embedded in one of these expeditions that included people collecting, snakes and reptiles as well as birds. And this is like, and this still goes on today, this is old school museum collecting. So it's not like, hey, what's that bird? Get a photo. It's like, hey, what's that bird? Right? Because that's kind of how you learn about what they are. And so they discovered, spoiler alert, they do discover a new species. But just having gotten back from there is when I read it. And so I devoured this book. It's not that long. It was a good read. Certainly plenty of other books about that area. This is so if you go to the website, you can find this whole itinerary for my trip. It's going to be very jungly. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be hot and it's going to be moist. But it's going to be worth it. And so, like I said, there's a Scarlet Macaw conservation program there that you get to see up close, as well as the clay licks. And I picked these lodges specifically because people kept showing me pictures on their phones of jaguars. They're like, oh, I was just down there. I took this picture with my phone of this jaguar on the bank. Typically, it's the Pantanal of Brazil is where North American tourists go to get their jaguars. But they're difficult in Amazonia, but this trip gives us a better, pretty good chance of that and other wildlife and ridiculous numbers of birds.
Will this be new territory for you, or?
No, it's the Madre de Dios. The lodges will be new, but it's the same region I was in, was it November of 2017? So yeah, it's just, same basic area, just a different part of the river back in the protected reserve. There are problems down there. There are some serious environmental issues. In the north, there's a lot of poaching and that kind of thing. In the south, there's illegal gold mining, like really low budget, back country illegal gold mines, and it releases mercury into the water. But overall, the reserve is relatively pristine, and most of it, you don't see much evidence of that when you're on these tours, but it is there. You think you're in this remotest corner of the world, and then you come around a corner and there's an illegal gold mine.
Do you need shots or anything?
Not like Africa. Like I don't remember getting any shots for Peru. You want to basically just bring bug spray. It's all pretty luxe. I mean, you're drinking bottled water and you're not roughing it too much. I don't remember having any issues. Done.
Pleased with that, okay. And I know even less about, camera, about photography. One of your photos, maybe more, of the hummingbirds, when you shot it, I could see the two wings. So I'm curious to know, it wasn't all blurry, if there are two wings, I don't even know. But, I'm curious to know what f-stop you use. What do you need to know?
Pretty much
about-
always the lowest. So,
Oh, lowest.
the most wide open. So on my camera with my 100 and 400, I'm always shooting at 400 millimeters f5.6 because that's the widest open I can get. And the cameras are so much better now. I use like a Canon 7D, which is like a semi-professional digital SLR. It's like a $1,500 camera now, just the body, and then the lens is expensive now. It was for me, a big investment, but I really love this stuff.
So as a first timer, are we investing $1,500 for a camera?
Well, if you don't want a lens, yes. If you want a lens, you're investing another $2,000 on top of that to get. And then for Kenya, I bought an extender. You can buy. I'm sorry, Tanzania. I was supposed to do Kenya last year. The Tanzania safari trip, I bought an extender, which is 1.4 times, so it gets up to 640 millimeters or something like that. I can't remember. You lose a little bit of. You can't shoot any lower than f8, but Kenya, Tanzania, East Africa, is much easier for photography if you can get close to things than Central and South America. It's dark, it's rainy, and so you take your opportunities, and you can see you can do pretty well. But Africa's a little brighter, and so you can probably get away with f8. But anyway, getting into the weeds on photography.
That was a great talk.
All right, thanks for coming.
So you won't get any pictures with an iPhone.
You can. You certainly can. There's a thing you can do with an iPhone so the guides will have scopes. Like I'll have a scope, and you can put your iPhone up to the eyepiece of a scope. And there are things you can buy, and this has been a thing for as long as there have been iPhones. And you can buy an iPhone case with like a lens cap looking thing that's designed for your particular scope, where you put it over and it holds it steady. Otherwise, you're kind of like you're like trying to hold it, and it's challenging. But you can get some pretty good stuff, and sometimes the guides will do that for you. A trip I did in Panama, the local guide was the best New World tropical guide I've ever seen. And one of the things he would do, he'd take your phone, and he would phone scope it for you. We were looking at some perched owl or something like that. So that it's possible. It's not easy.
Why is the Scarlet Macaw red? Where do they get the pig?
Those, yeah,
And why are they so colorful, the birds?
yeah. There's a lot of
Sexual selection.
There's a lot of schools of thought on that. Sexual selection is kind of the dominant one. There's a guy named Rick Prum out of Yale who I met on Nantucket back when Vern was still around, and there was still the Nantucket Birding Festival. He was a friend of Vern's. But he has this kind of iconoclastic view, and he's written a book about it. He won a Pulitzer Prize. Where he doesn't think it's sexual selection. He thinks that it's just sort of like general preference of birds for their concept of beauty. You know, in other words, sexual selection is like, well, the colorfulness and the brightness signals to a female that the male is vigorous and has good genes, right? So there's some signal, you know, some fitness message being transmitted to the female, and it's all very mechanical. But Rick Prum is saying that, you know, there's other schools of thought that some random preference of a female back in evolutionary time has just been maintained over time, and it doesn't have any connection to fitness. Anyway, this is kind of,
Right.
well, you asked.
And where do those pigments come from?
They produce them through their own particular biochemistry, and it gets deposited on the feathers. So the different kinds of melanin get deposited directly on the feathers as they grow. Sometimes there's a mistake, and you get like albino bird or partial albino birds, where it's white and there's no melanin. But there's different kinds of pigments. Anthocyanins that are, those are the red ones, I'm trying to remember. But you could debate some evolutionary biologists as to why the Scarlet Macaw is red, and you wouldn't find a consensus. Because God made them that way, and why not?
So they can see the color.
Yeah, and they can also see things we can't see, like blue jays. You know, there's no male and female plumage on a blue jay, but they can see ultraviolet light reflected, and so to them they look different. Like males and females reflect ultraviolet light differently. You had enough? Yeah. I can go on all day.
I know, really, thank you.
Well,
Thanks for coming.
You're welcome.